Hello, dear lurkers out there. Here are hopefully your most favorite Babylons of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. And yes, we're finally back as 3 people. You can see us all now because I finally made it back from my vacation. And yes, we are starting today with the new episode, which I watched for the first time, Layla watched for the second time, and Alex watched it so often we stopped counting. Just real quick, summit for the episode. Well, there are just 3 important aspects to know about it. We have some sort of religious summit where every or almost every ambassador presents their most important religion. We have an assassination attempt on Jakar, and we have some relationship issues with Sinclair again. Did I miss something?
You didn't give us the episode title, but other than that, this was great.
Yeah, then the interesting thing is I had to rewatch the last minutes at home, where I had only the German version. The funny thing is in English it's the Parliament of Dreams, and the German title would translate to something like Attack on Jakar, which is highly uninteresting and boring and gives up everything that's happening in this episode. So yeah.
But it's such an interesting example because it's not only that the translations are bad, they go like out of their way looking up another plot in the episode to then describe that instead of the normal title. It's a mystery to me.
Why bother with the original when you can butcher it? Well, before we jump in on our discussion, our question for today's more important, clearly, introduction is which way you like to celebrate, like your birthday or something.
Yeah. Oh, that's a difficult question. I don't really agree on that. So we wanted to answer that like in relation to the episode. So if it's rather like a Minbari party or rather like a Centauri party. Neither, I guess. I don't know. How do I celebrate? Oh God, that's such to be more difficult than I thought.
How do you celebrate?
A good question. Do I celebrate anything ever?
Yes.
But I guess I'd more be, it'll be more like the Centauri party. Like if I do, I think I like to escalate completely. And yeah.
So you try to become one with your inner self, just like Londo did, passing out on the table.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the goal, yeah.
Okay, I guess for me it's gonna be probably also gut instinct neither, but if it comes down to it, probably more like the Minbari ceremony, not exactly because that sounds like the more fun one, but I have to talk to less people and there is like more interesting little background there. I like this like poem that they're reciting that sounds like it could be part of something interesting. So yeah, just the opposite.
Well, I have to say, it would, on my case, it would be neither of these versions. But if I would try to incorporate what was shown in this episode, I would say I would probably try the Minbari way, but it would, because of the guests, would turn to the Centauri version, and at the end I would just stand somewhere in the corner and judge the people on my party before leaving.
All these people that you have invited, what the degeneracy they are up to.
Oh, like, why did I invite you? Why do I even like you? Why am I friends with you? No, not that hard.
See, and none of us took the alternate answer that the episode offers and say maybe it's just like a nice dinner at the local restaurant like Sinclair and Catherine did. So
because that's even more boring.
Yeah, I guess we are all just too much of party animals to do that.
Yeah, I mean, our problem with the Minbari party is that I grew up kind of weirdly new age religious, so that kind of always gives me flashback to reading horoscopes and stuff like that. So I think even if it would be performed seriously, I couldn't take it seriously and I would just flee.
Just replace the new age stuff with some nerdy stuff you like, and everything is nice, like a theme party of your favorite author or favorite series, and everything is fine.
I think regardless of what party we are celebrating, we can all agree on the alien costumes. Those are a good idea. We should all keep those, no matter what it looks like. But okay, I think with your comment, we are already starting a little bit into the main discussion part of our show. Meike already did like a great synopsis. So which of the 3 main plots of this episode would we like to start talking about? Was there anything that triggered a especially emotional response, like Sinclair's jumping into the fray last time?
I have to say, if it's the relationship part, when it started, I was like, oh, can I skip this episode, please? Because, yeah, I have to admit, I'm not really the romantic type, and this is just so over the top, and it's sappy, and
it starts out kind of cheesy, that's true.
yes. It's cheesy most of the time. The end is somewhat okay, but the most part didn't feel right in any way.
It feels very much 90s in that moment, yeah.
I think the soundtrack doesn't help it, because it gets like really overbearing in these scenes, and especially early on, I feel like Babylon 5 doesn't have a ton of music, so there's this one like synthesizer romance theme that starts really going in there, and that might become a little bit much. But I mean, in this case, it's probably a blessing that Catherine is a spaceship captain that will go out into the unknown and probably won't be on the station all of the time. So maybe you will be saved having Sinclair in a relationship always and every time.
The point is, I think it would be a lot different if they had a long-term relationship and you would see her more regularly, and also there is really a relationship and not just some little talk and then a sex scene, because that's basically it. That's what the relationship they presented. Yeah, it contains.
Yeah, but we kind of get to know so much about their past, and I mean, to kind of have these people that you run into and then have these long stories with, I don't know, I found that part the most relatable. They were just talking about it like it was, I don't know, a teenage love story. So, yeah, again, that dynamic I found relatable, but the way it was narrated was a bit like, oh,
okay. Maybe that was my problem, because it felt like a teenage love story and not like a grown-up version. Because there's, I mean, it's the problem with most love stories, especially if they start, or if it's something like an on-off relationship like Sinclair and has here with Catherine. There's a difference between falling in love with someone and being in love, because being in love is work. It's a dedication, and it's you have to always communicate with each other and things like that. But falling in love is just your thinking of an ideal of you think how it could be, but it has nothing to do with reality, and that's kind of the problem here, because it's that's why they fail. They just think how it should be and don't get to the work part. Did I? you look a bit puzzled.
No.
You're getting closer and closer to the screen, so I feel like you have an answer.
And now I'm just getting closer to the screen because where I sit, the light just doesn't reach my face.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. But I don't know. I still kind of, I mean, maybe it's just because they both have these lives that are so demanding, so that they constantly put all of their energy and all of their work into that. But I find this kind of constellation that they have also very relatable on some level, actually. So I kind of feel like how they are written would work out if they would just stop talking or talk differently, or I don't know.
I guess there's a difference between their relationship being relatable and functional also. Like I definitely get the point that their point of failure seems to be this ability to really commit what they're doing. And I mean, this is what they are also aware of. They're constantly talking about that. On the other hand, that doesn't make the relationship for my viewing experience necessarily very unrealistic, just something that is not incredibly compelling to watch maybe in the beginning. In fairness to the show, I think the relationship that they were going for was supposed to be a little bit more invested. I think their favorite plan would have been to keep the relationship that Sinclair had from the pilot and carry it over to here, so that she wouldn't be an entirely new character, but somebody that we've already seen. But of course, because of scheduling issues and because the production was stretched out so long, this didn't work out here. But in this case, do you see a potential for this relationship to get better for you if they do keep it up, if they actually manage to commit to it this time around, or was this such a bad start that there is no chance?
Maybe I'm a bit blocking this because of the start, because it's exactly what I dislike. I mean, there's always a way to make a relationship work, but it's not an easy way. And I think the problem would be like how would those two be able to connect on a longer term? I mean, they obviously, yes, they have a few things they talk about, from what I think it's the brother and the father or something, like they know the families, but what would they the question is, what would there be like their interests? Is there a way for them to communicate about it? Or I mean, what is with Catherine gets a lot of money. I mean, they don't even really talk about this. So if they are not able to talk about the mundane, the daily, for them, yeah, I don't know. It's really complicated because, yeah.
Maybe let's try and touch on this point, though. What do they have in common? What might be something that actually is able to connect them? Because we get one scene, and to all of your relief, this is also something that can lead us to the different other plots of the show. There is one point where he talks about the Minbari ceremony, and this is where Catherine immediately jumps on and explains to him that this rebirth ceremony of the Minbari could also double as a kind of marriage ceremony. And I found this interesting just from the simple world-building perspective that on one hand you have the commander of the station of Babylon 5, a guy whose job it is to facilitate interspecies relations, and then you have the private spaceship surveyor captain who is just out there in the galaxy having her own adventures, and she just happens to know a little bit more about this particular alien custom because she's been out there in the galaxy. This part I actually kind of enjoy for her, that you get this sense, oh, she's just been around the world a little bit. And this, I could imagine, is also something that these two have in common, that they both have kind of this excitement about being in the galaxy and this excitement on some kind of doing what Sinclair does all the time, jumping into the starship and going out there. And he is in a position where he shouldn't really do that. She has made this her job. So maybe this is sort of what brings them together, this excitement about being there. And maybe through this, Babylon 5 is sort of the one place in the galaxy where this interest can be strong enough for both of them to build a relationship out of. I don't know. I don't want to advocate for their relationship too much at this point because we only get to see it in this one episode so far. But this is sort of the main point that I also found most interesting about her character just on her own, that she has sort of this adventuring streak that I see somewhat reflected in Sinclair.
Yeah, I mean, she is an archaeologist, and we already pointed out a few episodes ago, I guess, that archaeology is somewhat more interesting and different in that universe. So she definitely has the potential to see a lot of very groundbreaking things.
I don't know if she's an archaeologist per se.
Was an archaeologist? I always had her in my mind as one.
I'm not sure. At least the way it's shown here, it's more that she's doing like planetary surveys, and she sort of sells the information that she collects to companies to do mining.
Yeah, no, I think I mixed her up with a character from the second season.
Possible.
Yeah,
possible.
okay.
But I mean, it's still like your point is completely valid. Still, that she, even if there is archaeology to be found on these rocks that she's looking at, this is definitely something that she'd still be involved in.
Yeah.
I have to throw in when she said that with the rebirth ceremony also being a marriage ceremony, I had to say my Spanish senses were tingling like, oh my gosh, that's another moment for the fan art or fan fiction department to go wild.
I mean, maybe let's start talking a little bit about the alien ceremonies and the sort of the main attraction of the episode. And if we start with the Minbari ceremony, her comment definitely rings some alarm bells, but I think Mira Furlan's performance as Dylan on its own, I think, would be enough to trigger every fan art that will ever come out of this, because she was definitely doing some looks there in Sinclair's direction and taking full advantage of this little red fruit that she was eating.
I'm sure it was a cherry tomato.
I'm pretty sure it was. But yeah, in general, what are we thinking about this Minbari ceremony? Up to this point, we've talked a little bit about the Minbari already as sort of a culture that we've met. And this is, I think, the biggest sort of insight we get beyond Dylan's personal point of view. This is actually a little bit of a view into Minbari society, both through the ceremony and then also through her aide that arrives for the first time on the station. We get to see Lanier, who is very timid when he comes aboard.
I have to admit, somehow all I remember are the red fruits and the looks. I'm not really sure what was said when during the ceremony, but I would just think it's something fitting to the obedience and role that Linnea is so strong posing when he's arriving.
This, I thought, was a nice sort of juxtaposition in this episode. On the one hand, we get the Minbari ceremony, and this feels a little bit like we've just arrived at Rivendell, right? There's harp playing and little bells going. Everybody has robes, and there is this holy text, I presume, that they are reciting about the 9 that are vowing to sacrifice themselves to some greater cause and such, and all of this is very mythical and great, and it kind of fits this image of, oh, those are the space elves, big coded as the good guys. They are like about light and crystals and everything is fine with them. And then we get to meet one of them in person, and he's very nice and talks about living in a temple and gives us this wonderful quote, "I don't understand, but understanding is not required, only obedience." And suddenly a lot of alarm bells are going off, because that is a cult sentiment. That is not normal. That is not something that you want to hear as like a foundational piece of any kind of culture. And I thought that it's probably not a coincidence that we learn these two different things about the Minbari culture in the same episode. On one hand, sort of how nice and ceremonial and traditional it can all look like, but then also that it's obviously underpinned by some very questionable ideology.
In general, the Minbari just always give me these vibes of these hippies that have dark secrets, of these cults that look super hippie, peaceful, or whatever, and then just turn out to be super scary when you are too deep in it. And I think that's kind of like one focus of this rewatching, actually, that I realized the Minbari culture in general just rings this bell of being interesting and being like something hopeful, something full of light, something full of peace that you can just kind of look up to, and especially in difficult and struggling times. But that has all of these elements that are so frightening and dark.
And it feels like the snake car in the Jungle Book.
Yeah.
Drops to me.
That's a callback, but yeah, it's quite apt, yes.
Yeah. So yeah.
So we would all be in Garibaldi's boat who refuses to eat the fruit. We are not going to drink the Kool-Aid. We are not interested in this cult.
I mean, how he acted. I mean, everything that was missing that was written under nope. I mean, his face is saying it so hard. Nope. Not with
Yeah.
me.
He's not in general, out of everyone we see on the human side, he seems the least enthused about the entire idea of this exchange program of religious ideas from the very first scene where this guy never received any kind of sensitivity training in terms of other cultures. He's just straight up not interested in these religious people coming aboard.
But can we talk for a moment about the fact that in this stage we still have someone in Earth Essential who gives the command, who organizes this kind of festival? Because we've heard last we've heard from Earth were kind of only bad news, that we had these pro-Earth groups gathering more and more supporters, and that Earth was getting their hands on this technology that we'd seen in the last episode. So there were a lot of news that were worrisome from the political point of view from Earth. And now we still see, at the moment, we still have a government that tries to function in a positive way on this intergalactic level still. So that's interesting, I guess.
It is, and it definitely shows us that we don't have a monolith here, right? The Earth is a big place with a lot of people, and the government is a big organization, and there are different departments, and not all of them have been sort of involved in the bioweapons development that we saw in Infection. Others are genuinely interested still in this thing. I mean, we have this religious ceremony now, but in general, like, the Earth Alliance is still funding Babylon 5 as a program in general. Although, as a caveat to that, I'm still somewhat interested sort of what the plan was for the Earth presentation. Because we see Sinclair who says, oh, I don't really know what I'm going to do, and then he puts together his own little presentation in the final scene, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But personally, I don't believe that Earth Alliance said to the commander of the station, have this big festival, and then didn't provide any kind of plan beforehand. It feels to me more so like Sinclair just kind of chucked the old plan out of the window and did whatever else he wanted for himself. But I wonder if maybe, the Earth First elements that we have in Earth Alliance were more like, oh, we're going to give this like big military parade, and then, I don't know, there's a Mormon choir going to be singing, and then it's going to be this like glorious presentation of why Earth culture is the best on Babylon 5.
So
I mean, this could still be the thing.
You think humans in general have turned into Americans?
I'm not saying that, but...
Oh, wait, I said that on the internet. That was maybe a bad idea.
No, it's just... Earth Alliance as a whole is very much modeled after the United States. That's just the thing. It has a president, it has like a Senate, which represents like the different nations/states on the globe. So it's that is just a comparison that we kind of have to make. So, I mean, yeah, I just think there might have been plans on Earth for this festival that might have been less optimistic than what Sinclair himself gave us.
So that also might have been less religious in the end, you mean?
I think so, because it's talked about showcasing cultures and traditions, and religion is always a part of that, but I think it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly this. And I think the Centauri ceremony is a nice example for this, where, their god statues are a part of it, but that in and of itself isn't a religious ceremony by that point. Anything more about the Minbari? Otherwise, I think we can switch over to the Centauri ceremony.
I would just chime in for the last part you said about that you can't imagine that Earth Alliance says we do this summit and have no plan for what is presented. that would be a version I would totally agree on. But also I could imagine that it was something like, oh, we have to, on the one hand, we have to prove that it's somewhat worthwhile because we're still giving money there. So we have to use this direction to showcase that we're actually using this station for something. And yeah, like quick idea and Sinclair is the one who has to carry out. That's also something I could imagine there, just so that they can say, just for the public relations, we're using Babylon 5. It's not a waste of money.
Of course.
Yeah.
Now that you're talking about this, if I think about ulterior motives, there is certainly also a history of sort of using cultural traditions and ceremonies and presenting them as this like fun, exotic thing that you can do, but not necessarily in the most respectful or realistic light. So it might also have been a way for Earth to kind of point at Babylon 5 and say, look at all these funny little alien people and their weird little religions. Aren't we glad that we are more advanced than this? Like, if you want to go the more, dare I say it, Star Trek route of saying, we have evolved beyond the need of religion, that would be an easy way to also establish that, by saying, look at all these like backwards people and their stupid little religions, and we are better than that. Let's move on to the Centauri side of things, which is going to be a more exciting ceremony, or was a more exciting ceremony, very much different, although I will still maintain that it has the same parallel of being this great celebration on the surface, and then as soon as they start talking about why it is a celebration, suddenly everything gets a much darker undertone.
Yeah, at first it gives that feeling of a bacchanalia celebration in favor of I'm missing the English name here. Dionysus? Help me out.
Dionysus?
Yes.
Let's say Bacchus with the Latin one. It's easier to pronounce.
Confuse people.
Yeah, depending if you go for the Greek or the
The Roman one.
The Roman one. It's like a lot of drinks, a lot of food, a lot of women running around. If you look at be it some art from that time, if you look at something like the Greek mythology, or you have so much presented in exactly this way. So yeah, that seems to me certainly the citation here.
And I think this is interesting, that out of all the depictions of the Centauri that we've seen so far, this is the one which I feel like reflects most as ancient empire, Roman Empire, sort of this pop culture image of Nero in his palace setting Rome on fire and celebrating over the flames. And very recently we had this wonderful poll on Twitter going, where we were asking people about what is the Centauri Republic most like, and we were still mostly in the late French camp, where it's was more about sort of the politics that they're doing. But now that we're looking at the way they're partying, this seems more carnal almost. This is like very much this this ancient style, and the way that they talk about all the different. It's sort of this celebration of even the way they talk about of ancient events, of this heroic time when they were fighting for their survival, and the way they describe, like, we would count our living members of our entire species and such. It's very much like I'm reading the Odyssey and reading about the Trojan Wars rather than any real historical event.
Yeah, we also had a discussion here when we watched the episode right now, how we have to understand the conflict with the Zorn.
Yeah, the Zorn.
Because they are written with an X, I was confused. But yeah, if they were actually another species, like if they, for example, had their own version, like the Neanderthals, like very closely related, but still another kind of species or subspecies, and drove them to extinction, like if there really was a biological difference, or if it was just a group of Centauri and it was just a racism construct, so that now, like, it's a version, like you said, if the Nazis had won, then in 300 years in the future, we would have also have this narration of there was a different kind of people and actually really wasn't. And that's a question to discuss, actually, which version it was. I tend, because of something I know from later on when I watched everything, I tend to the second version, so that there was not another species on that planet, but it's open for discussion, definitely.
Yeah.
I would, even without the knowledge you have from later episodes, I also would tend to the second version. It just feels more realistic, relatable. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it feels like it would fit better in this context, especially if it's something like so ancient, so old. It's more likely that it's something on this level.
And I think it's also very fitting with what we've learned about Centauri culture so far, the way that they sort of portray themselves. If we think back to Born to the Purple, he talked about how it's all about mask, all about appearances. So in their eyes, it might be just this thing. If you have a group of people that are branded as a different species, as another kind, and they lose the war, then that is just the reality. Might makes right, whether or not that was biologically founded or not. And we also know that the Centauri are playing fast and loose with definitions of species. Like they find Earth and they say, oh, those are our long-lost cousins. It doesn't matter that they are genetically completely different. We will just incorporate them into the Empire as a long-lost colony as long as that's right. And let's just for a second entertain the notion this had actually worked. I'm sure the Centauri would have just found like a way to explain around their definitions to make that work in their as part of their empire rather than getting stuck up on the biology of it. And I imagine this conflict with the Zon might have been something very similar where, yeah, it's just something that they've established now because then it feels just better.
What I found interesting here when I compare these two ceremonies is that we know exactly what is celebrated how when we look at the Centauri. It's something dark, but we know what and why and how. And I at the moment, I lack that context for the Minbari. I just know that they make this kind of mysterious rebirth ceremony, but I don't know what is celebrated. Like, why are we doing that?
Yes, and I mean, it's fair to say that is just down to the fact that the Centauri are very open about celebrating genocide. They provide us with this context with no hesitation, and the Minbari are obviously much more guarded about what their religion is all about. They don't give you the context for the story that is being told. We know something about the Nine and something about sacrifice and something about defeat, but they don't explain the context of this, and they also explain that this is a rebirth ceremony that can double as a marriage ceremony. This is something that we also only learn after the fact. So it seems like they are willing to show off some of what they are doing, but they are not going to explain it. And this too is something, if you talk about this feeling a little bit like New Age religion and stuff, that seems kind of like this superficial, oh, I'm just going to show you and then you're going to get it. And this goes beyond words. I don't need to explain what this is. You just look at the crystal and you feel that it's healing you. Don't question it. Don't come at me with like history and science about this. That's not the point here. So yeah, maybe this is a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah.
Do we want to try? I don't know if there is actually a lot of stuff to talk about there, but I think it's kind of notable that we get to see two, as is described, dominant, semi-religious celebrations for these alien species, and neither of them is openly monotheistic. We have the Centauri, which is very much this like pantheon of small idols for everything in life, and they even go into explaining, well, we just need a god for every occasion. Like if a new emperor is there, or if there's a new war that is being fought, they probably have a new deity for that, just to go along with it.
And I could even imagine that these gods are like in the Roman Empire, just they found a religion with this god on this planet, and hey, yeah, that we could use that fits
That's
right.
one of ours.
Yeah, that's ours, exactly.
Which would be interesting to see, like, why do they have so many gods? Well, they've conquered and colonized so many of the other alien species. Like, I wonder if you would take the little statues that they have on their table and, like, carry them to the other ceremonies, how many of them you would immediately recognize of, oh, this figure you obviously stole from the Valkyrie, this one is obviously from the Re, and so on. That would be an interesting way to look at it.
I mean, exactly that would explain why the Centauri were back there so successful, because like the Roman Empire, they just concluded everything in their culture and didn't. So the reason to for a new part in their empire was not to say no, because their culture just was kept. It wasn't annihilated or destroyed. It was just consumed in a way.
Which would be interesting to see why, especially with the Narn, this creates such a antagonism there. We know the Narn were relatively technologically underdeveloped compared to the Centauri, so maybe there was too much of a difference there that the Centauri couldn't assimilate this as easily into their own culture, or something went wrong there, or maybe there is even parts of Narn culture that have been actually adopted by the Centauri, and this is something that they're hung up about. Definitely something to be on the lookout for.
I mean, at least we don't have information about the Narn religion, or if there's something like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's interesting that we don't get any like formal information about Narn religion, like we don't have any display or anything, or are not aware that there is something for them happening. But as a subplot or as a B-plot for this episode that is about religion and culture, we have this assassin plot, which is kind of a statement on Narn culture.
In general, I would love to talk more about Narn culture, because there are so many little tidbits that some of which I only noticed on this watch through. So definitely let's have a closer look on that. And what's already apparent, Jakar is part of the Minbari ceremony and the human ceremony. He's not part of the Centauri ceremony, as far as I know, which makes sense. But in both the ones where he is, he's very quick also to storm away from them and doesn't participate. So he seems in general not very much inclined, which then kind of opens the question, did the Narn just not plan any big presentation of their culture, or is it more Jakar himself that didn't want to do this? And yeah, sure, he was preoccupied being scared of an assassin, so that's also...
Yes, but not just that he was preoccupied. I meant that writing it this way kind of made a comment on Narn culture from another point of view.
Absolutely.
Here we have Narn culture in practice.
It's also a kind of presentation. Okay, I am glancing very quickly, but I think we've talked about the Centauri, we've talked about the Minbari. Do we want to jump to the end and talk about Sinclair's human culture presentation for a moment?
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, we were both very curious how you feel about this, Meike, because you talked about humans are special stories before.
Yes, and we have special here, but I have to admit, I liked it because there are so many religions, and I mean, it's not just the really big ones presented here, but also smaller groups of people. And I mean, what I thought was really interesting is that the first one is a non-religious person. I mean, and honestly, yes, that's what is forgotten usually. I mean, you need an opposite. You need a non-religion to have a religion, and I really like that it starts with an atheist.
I really like that too, because people sometimes forget when you talk about religion, we sometimes forget that as important as it is to have the right to believe in something and to practice your religion, it is just as important to not have a religion and to not want to have one. Like, I remember like the first times when I was in church with my mother and I didn't stand up anymore, I didn't pray with them anymore, I basically was there for help and support, but not for all of the religious stuff anymore. And that was such a big problem, and I realized that this religious group really could not understand the importance of not wanting religion, and that was kind of reaching, because I thought very religious people would accept any kind of spiritual or personal mindset that you have towards this. In that case, I realized, no, they don't. They don't realize how important it is to not have a God, for example.
And especially that you have the right to choose this for you.
Yeah. And that is also psychologically important then, to not join a prayer, to not participate in anything, because, it's not right for you mentally to do that. And
I think this is also notable. He puts this at the very beginning here. I think this is also necessary because you cannot present all of the religions that come after side by side if you don't start out with the idea none of these can have a claim to be exclusive or entirely dominant or the only option, because if that were the case, they would be mutually exclusive. So you have to start with the statement, all of this is optional, and you have these choices, and only then the rest can exist next to each other. But I think this is also a thing. It's very good that you mention the importance of choice, that you both mention the importance of choice, because in engaging with Babylon 5 and with this episode especially, this is one of the first moments where I've really noticed that it makes a huge difference whether you're consuming this show that is a American show produced for an American market, if you are consuming this as an American or as, in our case, a Europeans. Because in discussions about this episode and the importance of putting atheists there, this is a much, much bigger deal in the US than it is here in Europe, especially in Germany, where secularism is extremely strong, in France as well. It's a much bigger deal in the US, let alone in the 90s US, where openly being an atheist isn't really an option in every part of the country. And so JMS putting this here front and center is a big thing, definitely. But I think this also plays into this idea that I think it's notable that we see somebody like Garibaldi, who we don't really learn about his own religion, but who is definitely also very openly skeptical about everything that is going on, and having this as part of the cast and not as an antagonism. It's not like, he's the stick in the mud and he's a problem because of that. No, that's just a personal stance that he has. And from what we know about the actor Jerry Doyle, this is also something that he would personally have been very big on, having the option of putting his own opinion on that. I'm still interested, even though you're not as hard on this scene as I was afraid you might be, Meike. I'm still interested in which way we interpret this scene ultimately, because I feel like there's still two different options, whether or not this scene tells us a lot about humanity in relation to all the other species in this universe, or whether it tells us more about Sinclair as a character. Because I wonder, do we take this scene to mean literally that in the Babylon 5 universe, humans are special because they have this big religious diversity and cultural diversity, and the other species like the Minbari and the Narn and Centauri just straight up do not have that? Or do we take it to say more so, oh no, probably this kind of diversity exists in all these other species, they just didn't, their ambassadors didn't choose to show it that way. It's special about Sinclair that he says, no, I'm the guy that's going to kind of not show any ceremony per se, but just do a showcase of everyone. Because both, I find, would be plausible, but they would have different implications for how we watch this show going forward, I think.
I would feel more to that it's a choice of who Sinclair made, or which Sinclair made. Language package not working anymore. No, that's it. Because what we said before about if Sinclair did this all on his own, or if there was a preconception for him. if there, that really doesn't matter if there was a preconception, because in the end, Sinclair is the one who decided to present in this way. So I would, for me, clearly say that it's his decision to say we don't have this, and this, or this one religion. We have many, because from what we learned about him until now, I would say he's leaning more to some sort of individualism, and part of being an individuum is that you can choose of the options you have, and religion is an option you can make, a choice you can make, as we already elaborated. So yeah, I think this is Sinclair's choice to say they are all equal, and you can go and search what is most fitting to you, to your beliefs, and the way you live or want to live.
I would like to say something to that question in like about 2 seasons.
Sure.
No, because I can just say that we see that we have some cultures here that have been very much shaped by any ideas of racism of any kind, like the Centauri, and then also another version or consequence out of it, the Narn, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have cultures where this motive is not so upfront, and we still have to see what is kind of upfront. I mean, we have the Minbari, where just following and obedience is kind of like the big factor that shaped everything. So with presenting that this diversity is still there, and that there still are in command staff and also in political discussions, there are still voices like Sinclair who choose to promote this diversity. We see that human culture, human civilization in this universe has not been under these influences or shaped by the same mechanisms like the Centauri, for example, and have not developed this exclusion as a society. So that's definitely something we see here, and I cannot go any further at this point.
We will definitely have to come back to this topic multiple times. Maybe this is even going to be a yearly celebration, the Parliament of Dreams. Maybe every season has this episode in it. That would be fun. I'm sure Mike would be looking forward to more religious ceremonies every single occasion. No, it's just something that I'm also very interested, particularly with the Centauri, because we have made already so many comparisons there to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And I just wonder how much for them it's also a case of outwardly portraying this is our culture and it is unified and it is civilized compared to all the barbarians out there. But then if you zoom in on it and look at it in detail, it would still be this massively diverse thing where like every city has its own version of different cults for each of the different gods. And ultimately there is a huge range of diversity in there, but something that is deliberately obscured to any outsider because you want to portray this much more culture supremacy that they kind of claim for themselves. But okay, maybe let's swerve into the third plot to talk about, which is kind of the secondary plot of the episode, I would say, the assassination attempt. But I would like to stick with the cultural topic for just a moment, because I think this is the most we've seen of both Jakar, because he has a wonderful chest prosthetic in this one, which is very great, and we see a lot about his quarters. And there were just a few details in there that really stood out to me this time. For one, we see him making his dinner, which is, I think, a pig's head, a giant one, which he just is ready to bite into. I would have loved to see what this would have looked like if he wasn't interrupted. He has these little crabs that try to skedaddle away from him, which was very cute. But the one that stood out most to me is when he is with Natoth later on, when he's afraid, he has a knife in his hand. And I don't know if either of you noticed this, but this is straight up a Flintstone knife. Like, it has the leaf-shaped little blade, and it is like bound together with a piece of. This looks like a Stone Age tool.
I have never noticed it.
I had never noticed it before, but it looks like a Stone Age tool. And the table, the walls around him, he looks like he's living in a cave. And now we know the Narn weren't as advanced as the Centauri when the Centauri came, but I never got the impression that they were this backwards. But very much this is a portrayal of them as.
But I mean, you have you have societies, civilizations, even on Earth, that basically were on the level of Stone Age technology because they used stone tools mostly, but were super advanced, like Mayas, Inca, for example. I think many of them only had stone tools, but were advanced more than Stone Age times, just in their astronomy and so far. It would be interesting to see how much technology the Narn actually had when they were invaded, and how much they had developed, although they still used stone tools. It would be super interesting.
It would be super interesting. I mean, we know about them that were agrarian, which in these South American examples, especially when they have obsidian tools and stuff, is definitely something that can happen. That wouldn't be crazy as an assumption, but yeah, it just jumped out at me on this watch through that we get to see some parts of this culture, and it is something quite radical to see in a science fiction show. And obviously also something to keep in mind, like obviously they are not on this tech level anymore, but they are very much choosing to maintain this. And part of this for me is also wondering how much of a more advanced culture did the Narn have, but it got destroyed. So they have been kind of sort of reduced to the very basics of what was left after the Centauri occupation. Because I was also wondering a little bit about this thing. Why does it seem that a lot of alien species are more sort of monolithic in their culture in a lot of science fiction? And one possible explanation in this Babylon 5 universe would be, well, the Centauri have been colonizing everyone for a long time. And one thing that colonizers love to do is erase cultures wherever they go so that they get reduced to the very basics. And yeah, seeing Jakar with a stone knife in the hand, that is kind of what came to mind. Like, I'm just wondering what's more in terms of arts and materials and stuff was developed for the Narn and then just lost along the way. I mean, we can look at modern examples where there are some African cultures that had very sophisticated metalworking. It's just a shame that most of that metalworking is in a museum in London right now, so they can't really show that off.
There was a lot of stuff stolen there today, so I
yeah,
don't have anything to do with that.
No, I'm just, this is something that's, as a contrast, really is.
But I also then find it interesting that the reason why we develop our technology, or why we changed from stone tools to bronze to iron later, is not always that we make a new discovery and know that this is so much better than before. It has so many different reasons, like trade routes, like for example, if the road from the Middle East to Europe would, just for geographical reasons, be more difficult, we could have stayed hunter-gatherers for centuries longer. We could have stayed in the Stone Age for so much longer. So it's always very complex to see how this changes, I guess. And we don't know that much.
We don't know enough about the planet itself and the inhabitants, except for the Narn on this planet. I mean, maybe there are creatures that are especially good killed with a stone knife.
Very possibly so.
Or maybe there's some really fucked up reason why producing metalwork is just super complicated on Narn.
I mean, it might just be the point that most metal has been strip mined away. Could be as simple as that. I mean, and another possible reason that I'm wondering about is this thing. We know the Narn have advanced technology now. They build spaceships and everything, but most of that was scavenged from the Centauri and was this like rush to get to this level of becoming a power of their own that can stand up to the Centauri. So it's also a question, how different does technology and does culture develop if you have this specific goal in mind? Every piece of metal that I get to work with, every piece of advanced technology that I have, has to be militarily utilized, because I can't afford any kind of luxury beyond that, because otherwise the Centauri might come back. So it's also this thing like, maybe the entire cultural aspect of Narn life has been a little bit to the wayside because everything has been now under the prerogative of militarizing themselves, which would fit what Jakar talked about when he was in the Zen garden with Sinclair, about them having a peaceful and lush and agrarian culture before that has now been just sort of lost or has become part of the past because they just cannot afford to maintain that in the face of the threat they have around them any time.
I mean, as much as I like the image of a caveman with a pump gun, maybe it's just a resource problem that you need a lot of spaceships and everything to protect your planet, and if there are, well, resources are limited, and if there's not much on Narn, then yeah, it would be a wise choice to channel everything they have into the one thing that really can help them, protect them, save their lives.
Absolutely.
Yes, and what I also now had to think about when we watched him eat his dinner, or trying to eat his dinner. Actually, I hated when that happened. I hated when that happens in general in books and movies, when you have someone there with like a hot drink that they were craving, or their dinner or something, and then something happens or the plot starts and they just can't eat their food. I just hate it. And one of my favorite book series always starts with having coffee and not being able to drink it for some very adventurous reason, like a demon is popping in, and I was like, why is it happening? But it's
the worst.
It's the worst. But what I now had to think about when I saw him having this hat, this pig hat or whatever in front of him, and the cave in the back, and now the tool thing, it also gave me kind of the vibes of people in Mongolia today still living in a yurt. I mean, they exist.
Yeah.
And culture is very much active, and there are still celebrations even when you live in one of the cities and you have technology and you're not a wild caveman anymore. You still have your holidays where you eat like a sheep hat or whatever, served in a certain way. So yeah, that's the message association I got from him very strongly in this episode, actually.
I think this is something that we should just reiterate. This is not to argue that the Narn are cave people that have spaceships now. Like, yes, they have cities and advanced infrastructure and everything like that. Like, obviously they are an advanced civilization, but I think, and this maybe touches on yurts in Mongolia, it's this thing, if so much of the advanced technology is something that was brought on from the outside, if you then have a culture that is trying to hold on to its own identity and is very much concerned with building an identity that is really of their own, then they might just go further and further back in history to find these things that are unquestionably absolutely their own. And in the case of Narn, it might just be the case that the Narn have made many advancements of their own since the Centauri were on their home world. But if you want to have something that is purely Narn, that is just the epitome of what it means to be Narn, you want to go back to a time where they didn't have any contact with the outside world, with the galactic stage. And this might just be something very, very early on. And I think this is clearly in the case of Jakar the case. Like, there's no reason for him to have anything of stone in his quarters except the deliberate choice of saying this is something that I want to present and want to present proudly. And it's obviously working also. Like, he is in a strong position.
Yeah. In general, I feel like the plot, we can talk more general about
Absolutely.
it. In general, this plot and how it was told and acted out was a lot of fun to watch. Actually, it always reminds me of like a drama club in school, because they had so much fun acting it all out.
I mean, everything we love about Jakar, all his little affections to this point were like as an absolute high note. Every song he sings is fantastic. Him in his pajamas is an absolute delight. I don't know how many hours it took to get these Narn abs on screen, but it was worth it. It was great. Downright to his little banter about his proclivity with human women that he has, both with his attaché and then later with Garibaldi. Just the fact that he has this whole private life that is exactly as extravagant as we expected it to be it's great to see.
Also his assassin who had this little reading glasses on.
Those were it's so nice to see that this isn't a Jakar thing, it's a Narn thing in general. Yeah. They love these little like things.
I was so happy when I saw let me catch his name, Tupari with his glasses. I just loved it. I really loved it. I mean, this, I will kill you. Wait, what is your... Yeah, yes, I remember.
He is so good that he has like a little manual for his assassination so that he doesn't get the rules wrong and stuff. It's wonderful.
And a manual according to assassination. I was really happy when that whole topic with the death flower was presented, because I was sitting there. You know this conception, and I had to think about it, but I'm not sure about the translation. It's the black spot or the black dot. It's created by Robert Louis Stevenson in his book Treasure Island.
Oh yes.
It's a black dot, obviously, on a usually bright background, that is given to pirates to warn them, to tell them, to give them a sign, you will die soon. Robert Louis Stevenson created this in his novel, and it's been quite often reproduced. I think it was Pirates of the Caribbean 2, and even Doctor Who was used. And I was really happy to see, oh my God, Babylon 5 is also on this list. I really love this.
It is, and I'm very happy that you made this connection, because I was already distracted by that point. As soon as they started about talking about an Assassin's Guild, I was thinking back to, hey, I was part of that in Oblivion. I remember joining that club in various fantasy RPGs. Like, this was another thing where the Narn in this episode feel so much like a part of anything but a science fiction show. Like, this sounded like such a fantasy concept to have in this show. It was delightful. I really liked the idea. And like you already alluded to, this is also obviously a part of Narn culture that we see play out live and in action. It's not demonstration, but we see that assassins guilds and these blood debts and these old like rivalries among the higher circles of the government are definitely a thing. And it sounds like a rather martial and honor-bound culture in that way.
And maybe that's a good time to go to Natoth. Kodash was a bit, but Natoth is perfect. I love her. She's so gorgeous. I love her. I love her interaction later with Jakar. And I saw it coming. I mean, I'm sure everyone saw it coming when she was sitting there. Oh, did you get a death flower? No, you don't have to be scared. And then he's sleeping, and oh fuck, there is a death flower. She's perfect. I hope she doesn't die in a sad and very strange way with a malfunctioning airlock.
Yeah, that would be a shame. I also love that she comes in as the counterweight to Lanier. Like, we already had Vir as the sort of bumbling aide, then we have Lanier as the complete, like, obedient, timid guy, and she is, like, pretty much for the entirety on the episode, pretty much on the same level as Jakar. Like, she's eye to eye with him, punches him in the face and doesn't apologize for it. Like, this is a much different relationship that these two seem to have. Yeah, the unfortunate airlock accident with Kodath unfortunately came down to real-life reasons. It's just a problem that the Narn makeup is incredibly intensive to get into, and they were using adhesives and colors that were prone to provoking allergic reactions. So this is just something that is a problem, especially with these 90s shows. These elaborate makeups are just a massive strain, and not everybody is able to carry through with this. So unfortunately, the actress for Kodath, as far as I know, just wasn't able to return for this part because it was just too dangerous to actually get in there and risk any kinds of reactions.
And yeah, with this, she aligns with the actress in Andromeda. There was oh god, and I don't remember his name, but he had this full fursuit and rather heavy makeup, so he got a very heavy allergic reactions.
Now we don't learn a lot about the background or the further ramifications, but maybe just to talk about this assassination plot as something we learn about not only Narn culture, but also, of course, it's fun seeing Jakar flailing around desperately trying to deal with the situation. But I think it still also tells us a lot about how much of his strength and villainousness against Londo is also just an act that he puts on, because we see in this episode him dealing with a problem where he would have every right to go ham and kill this assassin, and he deliberately doesn't, and comes up with this rather whimsical way of disposing of the assassin and getting him on the run and stuff a little bit, which is still kind of cruel, still probably condemning the guy to death, but we kind of see that he doesn't really play this hard strongman role as much outside of diplomatic interactions with Londo.
But on the other hand, it's actually quite a smart a way of handling it, because if he would have killed this assassin himself, he might get in problem with the guild. And also he's putting up a sign saying, hey, I have this power to turn someone in favor for me. So there might be less likely to be an equal incident.
Absolutely. We see him being a little bit cunning in his sort of not only dealing with other species, but also in the internal politics. And I think this is also sort of the last big of the ambassadors that we had to learn about the skeletons in his closet. We know that Dylan has all these secrets about her, which he immediately also involves Lanier in, whether he wants to or not, which is too bad for him. We definitely know that Londo has some dark secrets in his past. We heard about that in multiple times, most recent with the Purple Files. And now we know that Jakar also was involved in like some sort of nefarious dealings among his own government. So we see that being an ambassador on Babylon 5 is also something that the people that get this sort of position have a tumultuous past and probably did some unsavory things to get into this kind of position of power.
Well, what we didn't talk about is Ivanova. We kind of ignored her. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of scenes, but I really was surprised seeing her when the drinking was with Lando, and obviously being happy about this celebration that's going on. I'm not sure if this is some sort of Russian cliche used here, or if this really is some sort of just her character, that she's just happy that there's not a disaster happening, and I don't know, but I really like that. It was kind of cute to see.
Yeah, I really also just loved her slightly amused acceptance of this story that she just heard, that is a disaster that didn't happen when she was around and had to do something about it, and just this excessive celebration for a weird reason, and just her ability to accept that. It's a very Slavic impulse, but it's all that, but it's also a lot her character, I guess. It's just, oh, there was a big mess and I didn't have to do anything here.
And I think it suits her. We know about her that she's very strict when she's on duty, but then she also is much more approachable when duty is over and she goes to a bar. Like, this is how Talia managed to get her first interactions with her. And I think this celebration of the Centauri is just right in this gray zone where, yeah, technically this is an official occasion, but it is at a bar and you are supposed to let your hair down a little bit. And so I think she just embraces that and goes along with it. And I in general, all the reactions of all the characters, seeing Dylan in the middle of this Centauri celebration was just delightful, because she was just as confused as she was with the popcorn in Garibaldi's quarters. Just, this was a million times more overwhelming. So she just had nothing to say, not even negative about this. And it was just very, very delightful.
Yeah. And now I just remembered that when Lando was starting to crawl over this table, that she said, "Oh, you're kind of cute." I really loved it, especially when he says it to Garibaldi in a kind of annoying way, but you're cute.
And in purple, I am stunning is like one of the most favorite quotes from fans of the show, and there is a good reason for this. To give a small glimpse behind the scenes, there are very, very few scenes in Babylon 5 that are improvised because it was directed very strictly after the vision of the creator. This is one of those few times where Peter Jurasik, who plays Londo, did ad-lib a bunch of these lines and just was having fun for his own sake, and it really shows that like the cast is genuinely just having a ton of fun with this kind of celebration and scene.
I think I will need a GIF when Lando is saying this to Garibaldi. I need this to communicate, to just throw it out every time.
You're cute in an annoying sort of way. Yeah, that is something that we need.
That's something I will send on a regular basis to my partner.
And as usual, I always like to point out like the small little pieces where the prop department and the set design did a good job. And I think they did a really good job just turning whatever part of the station this was into this like festive ballroom for the Centauri celebration. I think it was as a shorthand to convey the lavish sort of lifestyle that the Centauri engage in. I think it worked really well, and I just love seeing every scene in Babylon 5 where there's so many extras running around in the background doing their thing, and really portraying also the sense that this isn't just a handful of ambassadors running around on the station. They all are leaders of an entire community of this culture that they're bringing aboard. And yeah, this came through very nicely. The same goes for the lens ceremony, which is obviously much more formal, but the way that they kind of gave us this sense that there is still a big difference between official Ambassador Delenn and then this very ceremonial role that she took on, where her demeanor and her costume and such just felt very different. Okay, in this case, I think we are just about ready to dive a little bit into the tapestry of this episode. I didn't have time to prepare the graphic for this one because it's been a packed week, but we can still do the basics. So as usual with Babylon 5, we want to take into account that this is a show that doesn't really fit the formula for 90s science fiction TV, where a reset button is pushed every 45 minutes. But this is also not a fully serialized show from the streaming era that we are used to now. It sits into this kind of strange in-between space, and to really appreciate all the different connective tissues that this show has, we always like to take a look at our tapestry, and for every episode ask ourselves, what are some of the things from the series so far that have played a big role in this one, that were kind of connected, and going forward with this episode, what are some of the things that we would like to see continued? And I think there are definitely, character-wise, a few things that are picked up. Like I said in the beginning, I think the relationship that Sinclair has with Catherine here, of course, it's a different woman, it's a different character, but even taking this into account, I think the preferences that he has and the kinds of relationships that he has with the people around him still seems like it's cut from the same material. It's a similar feel to it. Any other connections that were maybe picked up on?
Well, we have to wait and see how many aids being changed in the remaining time, how many more malfunctioning airlocks there will appear. Though I would, since I would, I think we should go for the best, and think that they will stay for now.
I think Natal should be careful around airlock doors, because she is also just absolutely gorgeous in this makeup. I think the way that they made this work, it's not easy to do this with this heavy makeup that's like alters your facial structure so much to make it look still good, but no, it works really well in this one.
And we definitely had the lens secret. That was an issue again. And that her secret goes that far that even when Lanier arrived, he constantly has to break protocol while he talks to her. So we see that this thing is still there, but we have no idea what it's all about yet.
It's kind of a reminder of the secret, but I think also one of the first times that we really get to see her as Satai in action. I think so far we always learned, yeah, she's part of the Grey Council ruling body of Minbar. That's great, but now we actually see, oh no, this is a position where she just gets a random guy from her culture and just tells him what to do, and he will not ask any questions, which, at least to me, is a little bit surprising. This isn't like an ordinary politician. This is a much more like a revered figure that has a very direct authority over people. This isn't just somebody that has theoretical legislative power. No, this is somebody who will just tell you what to do and can, in a very straightforward fashion, order people around.
Yeah, I think that's it from connections to episodes that we've had before, is that?
I would say everything to do with the Centauri is just dialed up to 11. I mean, I think the main part for me is we learn that what the Centauri are doing isn't new, and it's not something that they started when they encountered other species. They have always done this. They are built on this, which I think is important, especially if we start talking about what's happening on Earth. If there is something happening on Earth, we talked in this episode a little bit about how does Earth stand to its own culture, and there we are talking about this sort of Earth First movement overthrowing an otherwise rather democratic and liberal society. This isn't what seems to have happened with the Centauri. The Centauri aren't a state that unfortunately went the wrong path like 100 years ago, and since then things have gone wrong. No, this is ingrained into their culture to its very core. They have always been that. And so if we're also thinking about what potentially over the course of the series could be done to maybe improve the state of the world a little bit. I mean, usually that is what TV shows tend to do. There will have to be something more than sort of restoring the old, like the Centauri aren't like the Galactic Empire where if you kill the Emperor, then everything is going to go back to the New Republic and it's going to be fine. Like this is a deeper rooted problem that people will have to deal with, and I think this is just very much emphasized in this episode again. Anything that we think we might carry forward from here? We already talked, obviously, hopefully, Jakara's aids. Any hopes that we maybe have also for Dylan's aid, Lanier? I mean, so far he's been kind of a piece of furniture for her to delegate tasks to, but maybe ideas what would be, for example, an interesting character dynamic maybe that you could imagine for Dylan to have to kind of bounce off of.
I would more say in general, I mean, I know what is happening, but I'm trying to block it out right now. I think that it's interesting that we have Lanier, who is really like a super unironic, unsarcastic, humorless, obedient Jedi kind of person. And it's just interesting that now he's on this station where there are so many other cultures and where there are humans around and everything, and just to see him deal with ambiguous situation, to see him develop a sense of humor, to see him in confusing situations where people don't say what they mean and act not accordingly to what they told him and things like that. To see him getting used to that could be interesting, I guess.
Could be fun. And I mean, we talked a little bit about how the Minbari have this sort of esoteric cult-like culture about obedience and stuff, and Lanier has ultimately in this episode done what you always want to do with people that grew up in this society, which is get out of there and get into contact with the rest of the world.
Get out of Minbar. No.
Yes, but I mean, legitimately, it's this thing. You want to get people out of this context to sort of deprogram them and get them thinking for themselves. But obviously, this then also has built in a little bit of character conflict there. Like, how long will this sort of identity that he has built up around himself about just being obedient and don't craving understanding, how long is this going to be feasible if he's in this world where he will have to start trying to understand people around him because they're not Minbari, and he will just not be able to function if that isn't a thing that he does. And I could imagine that this is something where problems might arise from.
Even with in contact with Dylan, because she has her way. She wants things done a certain way, and what if there's a situation where the protocol or whatever you want to call it is so strict that there two sides are colliding? What will happen then?
Yeah. Like, what if you make Lanier choose between Dylan and the culture that he grew up with, because he has been away for a longer time? What is that? I'm actually kind of sad that we didn't get to hear him talk about Minbar when she asked about that, because she was away so long from home. It would have been great to see sort of his perspective on everything. If he has any, if he would just say, well, I know my temple and nothing else, so that's too bad. Maybe that's exactly it. We said it jokingly a little bit, but looking forward, we have still just about 5 seasons of Babylon 5 ahead of us. This was one of the big events, sort of, what do you do with the Babylon 5 station, have an event of interacting cultures. So I think we can also expect that this isn't the last time that we've seen something like this. Certainly we won't have, like, every other episode this big religious exchange. I think this would get old over time, but the local alien cultures celebrating something and having to deal with that is definitely something that will come up again. And we've seen in this episode sort of small snippets of the differences and potential conflicts that can come from that. There will be more.
Maybe the next time they try to have a nice dinner together.
Oh, this could be like a Star Trek 6 situation where the Klingons get invited and you see like the direct culture clash of them, both sides genuinely trying to be diplomatic and just horribly failing because they just don't have the sensitivities for that. That would be fun. I would like to see Garibaldi in this kind of situation and struggling with it. That would be fun.
Or he would just sit on the sidelines eating popcorn and watch it burn.
Only once it starts escalating. Like, this is the problem. He's like chief of security, so you would have to deal with it. Maybe after retirement. Maybe this is his ultimate plan. As usual, we will have a little question for our lurkers out there. And we also asked the question over the course of the last week, inspired by Meike, which she made a comment that, at least at this point in the show, she wouldn't mind Garibaldi and Sinclair switching jobs for a spin and see how that goes, because maybe Garibaldi is a little bit better at delegating. Unfortunately, we had a poll with 20 votes so far, asking who people think would have made an interesting alternative to Sinclair, and Garibaldi came in last by a landslide. Nobody else wants to see Garibaldi in this position. And people did point out, and I think this is completely justified, if we look a little bit further ahead, maybe our opinion on Sinclair will also change. Like, this is something that is worth considering. And I mean, just looking at this episode, he had a pretty good idea on how to represent Earth.
And I also pointed out just a moment ago that also our opinion on Garibaldi can change. Later on, we see some flaws that may just change the picture a little bit. But who won the poll? That's the interesting question.
The poll was won, and I don't think this is going to be terribly surprising, by Susan Ivanova, his second in command. People would love to see her in charge, and especially seeing her handle the reporter in infection. I agree that she would definitely clean house. Like, her authority is definitely not an issue. What I also found very interesting is the second highest choice in this poll was Laura Takashima from The Gathering, which we quite liked. And yeah, I would have liked to see, I would have especially have loved to see the power team of Laura Takashima and Ivanova together as like second in command, and them leading the charge for the station. That would have been an interesting duo, I think. Because they have like very similar ideas on how to bend the rules and how to get their authority across. That would have been a really fun mix.
How would you celebrate, no matter if it's your birthday or something else, where on the spectrum between a Minbari ceremony and a Centauri ceremony, what do you put yourself in?
And as usual, feel free to answer this question in the comments below or in our Facebook discussion group, on Twitter if we put up the poll, and any place else where you can find us. We have a list of all social media links in the description, with the small caveat that YouTube always takes a while to fully verify your channel so that you can have all these links there properly. But yeah, there you can find us. And in general, in all social media networks, you can find us at The Third Age Podcast.
Yes, we will upload the poll in a few days after you watch this. Maybe a few general words on polls. I started one after we watched The Road Home, and I made a fourth option that said as an answer to the question. It said maybe, but and people voted for maybe, but didn't write a comment. Comment didn't fit the line for the response anymore, but it was meant that you write a comment when you vote for that. Yeah, that's just, I wanted to say that at some point.
Yes, exactly. Always feel free to put your own opinions in the comments on anything. We would love to engage with those. Okay, I think then, unless Mike, you had a comment?
Just saying that no matter if it's a comment or just a like, a share, whatever you do to interact and maybe a little promote our podcast is very nice and loved, and we thank you for that very much, dear lurkers, and hope you have had a nice time listening to this, and I promise from now on we'll be back on time since my vacation is over.